There is an image Carl Jung once painted in his work, the image of a human being who has stepped outside the invisible nets of control. A man or woman no longer moved by the fear of abandonment, no longer driven by desires that never end, no longer manipulated by the endless chase for validation. Jung called this state individuation, the becoming of one's true self. In the language of quantum physics, we might describe it as the moment an electron makes a quantum leap, the orbit it once knew no longer holds. There is rupture, there is trembling, there is uncertainty, but there is also light, a burst of brilliance that reveals a higher path. That is what happens when a human being begins to live as if they need nothing from the structures that once dictated their every move. And it is precisely this kind of human being, one who stands sovereign in their inner world, who becomes society's greatest threat. Now, when we say threat, we do not mean someone dangerous in the way the world often imagines, not someone violent or rebellious for rebellion's sake. The threat is far more subtle, and therefore, far more powerful. It is the threat of a soul who can no longer be manipulated, someone who cannot be bought with approval or broken with rejection, someone who, by needing nothing external to complete them, reveals the truth that much of what society offers is built upon illusion. Think about the systems we live in, the political engines, the consumer markets, the media cycles. All of them rely on one thing: human dependency. They thrive on our sense of lack. They whisper, "You are not enough yet. You must buy this. Achieve this. Do be seen this way." They depend on us chasing endlessly, because if we stopped chasing, the machine would falter. Carl Jung saw this clearly. Society at large is not designed to support your wholeness. It is designed to distract you from it. For if you knew yourself, if you integrated your shadow, if you came to peace with your own inner contradictions, you would no longer be easy to control. You would see through the games of fear and desire. And when one person awakens in this way, it unsettles the entire order built on unconscious conformity. In my own life, I have felt this shift. There was a time when silence scared me, when the thought of not being needed felt unbearable. I wore masks. I agreed when I wanted to protest. I played the roles that kept me safe. But underneath, there was an ache, a knowing that I was trading authenticity for acceptance. And the more I gave in to that trade, the more I withered inside, until finally, exhaustion became my teacher. The mask grew too heavy, the noise too loud, the demands too endless. And in that breaking point, I stumbled into something unexpected, the possibility of needing nothing. It did not mean I stopped caring. It did not mean I rejected life. It simply meant I stopped bargaining with my soul. I stopped giving away my center in exchange for approval I could never keep. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The fear that once held me dissolved. The world could no longer bribe me with praise or threaten me with exclusion. I had found something stronger, a self that was not dependent on the outside to feel whole. Quantum physics shows us that coherence arises when a system is no longer scattered, when it stops vibrating chaotically and begins to align. That is what happens inside a human being who embraces individuation. The shadow is not denied but seen. The inner opposites, strength and tenderness, logic and intuition, are not split apart but joined in harmony. The self becomes one field, unified, resonant, and from that coherence, a new kind of freedom emerges. The freedom of being untouchable by the world's manipulations. And yes, to society, that is dangerous. Because a person who cannot be manipulated becomes proof that all manipulation is optional. They stand as a mirror, reflecting back to the crowd. You too can be free. You too can stop chasing. You too can find wholeness within. And that mirror frightens those who profit from dependency. It unsettles the narratives that say you must keep consuming, keep conforming, keep fearing. But to the soul, and to those who have tasted even a drop of this freedom, it is not a threat. It is salvation. It is remembering that you were never meant to live as a servant to endless desire. You were meant to live as a sovereign being, whole and awake, part of a greater field that is always guiding, always holding, always enough. So when we talk about the man who needs nothing, we are not talking about indifference. We are talking about awakening. We are talking about someone who has shifted from living on the strings of society's puppeteers to moving with the rhythm of their own soul. Someone who has stopped searching outside and started listening inside. And in truth, that is not just a possibility for a rare few. It is the path open to each of us. It is the quantum leap waiting inside your own heart. The moment when you dare to stop, to breathe, to look inward instead of outward. The moment when you stop asking, "What must I do to be accepted?" and begin asking, "What is true within me?" Even if no one else sees it. That is the beginning of individuation. That is the first step towards sovereignty. And that, my friend, is why the one who needs nothing will always be the one who has everything. 1. Facing the shadow. There is a line from Carl Jung that has always stayed with me. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For a long time, I didn't truly understand what that meant. I thought awakening was about rising above pain, about being endlessly positive, about always looking toward the light. But life has a way of showing you what theory cannot. And what I have learned, what I have lived, is that healing does not come from avoiding the darkness. It comes from facing it. For the empath, for the sensitive soul, the shadow is not made up of evil deeds or sinister urges. No, the shadow often holds the very parts of ourselves we were told were unacceptable. The anger we swallowed when we were young, because showing it would have made us unlovable. The needs we silenced, because someone told us they were too much. The voice we hid, because speaking it would have disturbed the peace. All of these, piece by piece, were pushed into the basement of our psyche, hidden in boxes marked not allowed. And yet, they never disappeared. What happens when we push away these pieces of ourselves is subtle but profound. We start to live as if half of who we are doesn't exist. We present the good side, the agreeable face, the one that others approve of. But beneath that mask, the shadow stirs. It shows up in ways we don't expect, in sudden exhaustion, in unexplained resentment, in the feeling that no matter how much we give, it is never enough. The shadow doesn't go away just because we pretend it isn't there. It waits, and when it cannot be ignored any longer, it demands our attention. Facing the shadow is frightening. It feels like opening a door to a room you've kept locked for decades, not knowing what shape the darkness will take. But here is the truth: when you finally open that door, you realize what's inside is not a monster. It is you, younger you, wounded you, silenced you, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be loved. I remember the first time I let myself feel my own anger, not the explosive kind that lashes out, but the quiet, steady anger that had been buried under years of saying yes when I wanted to say no. For so long, I feared that anger would make me cruel, would turn me into someone unrecognizable. But when I allowed it to rise, when I let it speak, I found it was not destructive. It was protective. It was the fire of my soul, saying, "Enough." It was the part of me that had been trying to guard my boundaries all along. This is what happens when you face the shadow. You stop being a victim of it. You stop being unconsciously ruled by what you've denied. When you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, it controls you from the dark. It bleeds into your choices, your relationships, your health. But when you bring it into awareness, when you look at it without judgment, it loses its power to harm you. It becomes, instead, a source of wisdom, and something else shifts. 2. When you integrate your shadow, you stop being so easily manipulated by the outside world. Think about it. If guilt is your hidden wound, anyone can control you by making you feel guilty. If fear of rejection is buried inside, anyone can control you by threatening to leave. If your need for approval is hidden in your shadow, anyone can control you by withholding praise. But when you face these parts, when you accept them, they no longer have strings attached to you. No one can pull what you have already owned. This is why Jung saw shadow work as essential to freedom. Because until you integrate what you've denied, you are not truly free. You are always at the mercy of unconscious forces, both inside yourself and in the hands of those who know how to exploit them. Facing the shadow is like reclaiming stolen territory. Piece by piece, you take back what was always yours. And in doing so, you become whole again. And wholeness does not mean perfection. It does not mean you never feel anger or fear or longing again. It means you allow those emotions to exist without shame. You let them move through you without letting them define you. You know they are part of your human experience, not evidence of your failure. Imagine a garden that has been divided by a wall. On one side, the flowers grow, the parts of yourself you've allowed to see the sun. On the other side, weeds have spread in the dark, untended. For years, you believed the answer was to keep building the wall higher, to protect the flowers from the weeds. But in truth, the healing comes when you tear down the wall and tend to both sides. The weeds, given light, may surprise you with hidden blooms, and the garden, unified, becomes more beautiful than you ever imagined. So if you are at that doorway now, staring at the locked room inside yourself, know this: you do not have to be afraid. What waits there is not your enemy. It is your neglected self. And when you finally face it, you will see that the shadow was never here to destroy you. It was here to lead you back to wholeness. This is the path of the awakened empath. To stop pretending, to stop carrying only the light, and to embrace the totality of being human. To understand that your anger is not your shame, but your protector, that your needs are not your weakness, but your compass, that your voice is not your danger, but your liberation. And when you live from this place, you are no longer bound by guilt, no longer manipulated by the fear of disapproval. You are free to stand, whole and unashamed, in both your light and your darkness. And in that freedom, you discover the paradox Jung spoke of, that true enlightenment is not about escaping the shadow, but about finally embracing it. 2. Psychological independence. There comes a turning point in life when you realize that the approval you've been chasing for years is nothing more than smoke. It appears real. It seems solid. But the moment you reach for it, it vanishes. For so long, we learn to measure ourselves through the eyes of others. As children, we craved the smile of a parent, the nod of a teacher, the acceptance of our peers. Later, it became the praise of bosses, the validation of friends, the applause of society, and without even noticing, our sense of worth was no longer ours. It was rented, borrowed from the opinions and moods of everyone around us. This dependency runs deep. To be praised feels like sunlight. To be rejected feels like suffocation. And so, we twist ourselves into shapes that are not true, just to keep the light shining, just to keep the air flowing. We smile when we want to frown. We agree when our heart resists. We hide pieces of ourselves, piece by piece, until all that remains is a version of us that is palatable but false. And in that falsehood, society thrives, because people who need approval are easy to control. But there is a freedom, a profound freedom, that comes when you step out of this cycle It is not loud, not rebellious in the way the world might imagine. It is quiet, steady, almost invisible at first. It is the freedom of no longer needing to be approved of, no longer trembling at the thought of rejection. It is the freedom of psychological independence. When you touch this state, you do not become arrogant. You do not stop caring for others. You simply stop bargaining with your soul for their acceptance. You realize that being praised does not add to your worth, and being criticized does not subtract from it. You see praise for what it is, un hecho, a reflection of someone else's perception in a given moment, and you see criticism the same way, not as truth carved into stone, but as passing weather, shaped by another's wounds, another's projections, another's lens. I have lived this shift. There was a time when a harsh word could undo me, when one look of disapproval could leave me questioning myself for days. I remember how small I felt, like a puppet whose strings were pulled by every passing opinion. But slowly, through pain and reflection, I began to see that my worth was never meant to hang on those strings. It was already woven into my being. And once I began to trust that, the strings loosened. I no longer danced to every tug. I began to walk on my own. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming yourself, distinct from the collective, yet still connected to it. This is what psychological independence feels like. It is not isolation. It is not cutting yourself off from others. It is standing so firmly in your own center that the collective can no longer swallow you. You can engage with society, but you are not defined by it. You can listen to others, but you are not enslaved by their voices. Quantumly speaking, it is like moving from a scattered, incoherent field to one that is unified. When you are dependent on approval, your energy is unstable, swayed by every compliment, shaken by every criticism. But when you no longer need either, your energy field stabilizes. You radiate coherence, and in that coherence, you become untouchable. Society loses its grip because the tools of manipulation, fear of rejection, homophobia, no longer work on you. This does not mean life becomes without challenge. It means challenge no longer controls your sense of self. It means you can face rejection and remain whole. You can hear disapproval and stay grounded. You can receive praise without becoming addicted to it. You are free, not because the world changes, but because your relationship to it does. And here is the paradox: when you stop needing approval, you actually become more authentic in your connections. Because now, your yes is real. Your no is real. Your presence is not filtered through the fear of rejection. People may not always like you, but they can trust you. They can feel the solidity of someone who is no longer performing. At first, this independence can feel lonely. You notice how many relationships were built on your compliance. You see how many connections were tied to your need for approval. And as you step away from that need, some bonds fall away. But in the clearing, space opens for something far greater: relationships, built not on control, but on respect, not on dépendance, but on choice. Psychological independence is not a destination you arrive at once and for all. It is a practice, a continual remembering. Each time you feel the tug to prove yourself, to chase approval, to silence your truth for someone's comfort, you pause, you breathe, you return to the knowing that your worth is not up for negotiation. You remember that nothing anyone can give you or take from you changes what you already are. And in that remembering, you grow stronger. Each time, the grip of external control weakens, and your sovereignty deepens. So if you find yourself still chasing validation, still fearing rejection, be gentle with yourself. These patterns were learned for survival. They kept you safe once. But safety and freedom are not the same. And now, you are ready for freedom. You are ready to discover what it feels like to walk through this world with your head high, your heart steady, and your spirit unshaken. That is psychological independence, not arrogance, not withdrawal, but the quiet, steady power of knowing that you need nothing from the world to be whole. And in that power, society loses its grip, and your soul finds its wings. 3. Living with the self. The higher center Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." At first, these words can sound poetic, almost too simple to hold any real weight. But when you have lived long enough, when you have chased enough dreams on the outside, when you have bent yourself to win enough approval, when you have exhausted yourself trying to hold together an identity that never truly fit, then the truth of this statement begins to glow like a hidden fire. It is only by turning inward that you awaken. For many of us, the search begins outward. We look to society to tell us who we are. We look to relationships to mirror our worth. We look to achievements to secure our place in the world. And for a while, this chase keeps us busy, even satisfied. But deep down, there is a hollowness. No matter how much you accumulate, no matter how many people applaud, no matter how brightly you shine in the eyes of others, there is always a whisper. Is this really it? Is this really me? The moment you dare to listen to that whisper, you begin the journey inward. And what you discover is not another layer of identity, not another mask to wear, but something far deeper. You discover the self, not the self shaped by culture or family or expectation, but the self that has been there all along. The self that does not beg for recognition. The self that is whole without applause. The self that rests at the center of your being like a quiet, unshakable presence. Living with the self is not about detachment from life, nor is it about rejecting the world. It is about anchoring yourself so deeply in your own essence that the noise of the world no longer dictates your direction. It is the difference between being a leaf blown about by every gust of wind and being the tree rooted deeply in the soil, able to feel the winds, yes, but not defined by them. In quantum language, we might describe the self as coherence. Before, your energy was scattered, pulled one way by fear, another way by desire, another by the endless demand for approval. The field of your being was chaotic, vibrating at different frequencies, out of tune. But when you connect to the self, the scattered vibrations fall into harmony. You become one unified field, resonant, aligned, and in that resonance, there is peace. This does not mean the storms of life disappear. The world continues its noise. People still misunderstand. Circumstances still change. But your relationship to it all transforms. You no longer search for yourself in the shifting reflections of the outside world. You already know who you are. And from that knowing, you move through life differently. I remember a time in my own journey when I mistook identity for essence. I thought if I could just achieve more, if I could prove myself enough, then I would finally feel whole. But every milestone was fleeting. The applause faded, the satisfaction dissolved, and the hunger returned. It was only when I began to turn inward, to sit in silence, to face the parts of myself I had long ignored, to listen to that quiet inner voice, that I found something I could not lose. That presence did not vanish with rejection. It did not swell with praise. It simply was. And in resting with it, I realized this was the self. To live with the self is to stop chasing and start being. It is to wake each morning not with the question, how can I prove myself today, but with the awareness, I am already here. I am already whole. From this place, your actions are no longer driven by fear or the need to impress. They flow naturally, like water down a stream, like breath through the lungs. And this presence is not only for you. When you live anchored in the self, others feel it too. They may not have words for it, but they sense the coherence in your field. They sense the steadiness in your presence. It calms them. It grounds them. It invites them into their own stillness. This is why living with the self is not selfish. It is a gift. By embodying wholeness, you offer wholeness. By standing in your truth, you give others permission to stand in theirs. Of course, reaching this place is not a one-time event. It is not as though one day you discover the self and never lose touch again. It is a practice, a continual returning. The world will still pull at you, still tempt you to seek outside what can only be found within. But each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you breathe and turn inward, you strengthen the connection. And slowly, what was once a fragile thread becomes a steady rope, and eventually, an unbreakable root. So if you find yourself restless, exhausted from chasing, weary from proving, consider this. What if the thing you are looking for has never been out there? What if it has always been within you, waiting for you to turn your gaze inward? The self is not a concept. It is an experience. It is the stillness beneath your thoughts, the witness behind your emotions, the quiet presence that has never left you. And when you begin to live from that place, you awaken. You move from dreaming through the eyes of the world to living through the truth of your own being. That is what Jung meant. That is what awakening is. Not escaping the world, but seeing it clearly from the center of who you are, not losing yourself, but finally finding the self and realizing it has been here all along. 4. Freedom from the cycle of consumption. There is a kind of hunger that no amount of food can satisfy, no amount of money can quiet, no amount of possessions can fill. It is the hunger born of an inner emptiness, the aching sense that something essential is missing. And so we look outward. We buy what glitters. We chase experiences. We fill our homes and our closets and our calendars with more and more, hoping that at last the gnawing inside will ease. But it never does. The satisfaction lasts a moment, then fades, and the cycle begins again. This is the trap of consumer society. It whispers in our ears from the moment we wake until the moment we sleep, you are not enough yet. But if you buy this, if you achieve this, if you look this way, then you will be complete. And because the whisper sounds so convincing, we keep running, we keep reaching, we keep exhausting ourselves in a race with no finish line. But there comes a moment, if we are lucky, if we are honest, when we realize that the emptiness we are trying to fill cannot be filled from the outside. We notice that no matter how much we accumulate, the ache remains. We begin to see that the problem is not what we lack in the world, but what we have lost within ourselves: presence. Presence is not something you can buy. It is not another item to add to your collection. Presence is the simple, radical act of being here. Now, with yourself, it is noticing the breath in your lungs, the quiet beating of your heart, the ground steady beneath your feet. It is remembering that you are alive, not as a role to play, not as an identity to maintain, but as a being in this moment. When you taste presence, even for a second, something shifts. The cravings that once felt so urgent lose their grip. The need to escape, to numb, to distract, begins to fade. You realize that the emptiness was never asking for more things. It was asking for you, for your attention, your awareness, your willingness to sit in the stillness you had been running from. I know this from my own life. There was a time when I thought buying something new, chasing the next achievement, or even filling every quiet hour with noise would finally soothe me. But the relief never lasted, and each time it vanished, the hunger grew sharper. It was only when I stopped running, when I sat with the emptiness, instead of rushing to cover it, that I found what I had been missing. It wasn't a possession, it wasn't approval, it was presence. And in that presence, the emptiness dissolved. In the language of quantum science, this is the moment when chaos gives way to coherence. Before, your inner field is like particles scattering in every direction, vibrating with restless energy. Every new desire, every new distraction, every new craving adds to the turbulence. But when you rest in presence, when you stop feeding the chaos, the particles settle, the field harmonizes, coherence replaces confusion. And in that coherence, you feel a stability the outside world can never provide. To be free from the cycle of consumption does not mean you stop enjoying life. It does not mean you reject beauty or pleasure, or even the simple joys of comfort. It means those things no longer own you. You can enjoy them without clinging, and you can live without them without despair. You are no longer a slave to desire, because you no longer need desire to tell you who you are. This freedom is subtle, from the outside. Your life may not look dramatically different. You may still buy things, still celebrate, still enjoy. But inside, everything has changed. What once drove you, fear of emptiness, fear of not being enough, no longer has power. You act from fullness, not from lack. You choose, rather than chase. And when you live this way, you notice how much energy is returned to you. The constant reaching, the endless wanting, was exhausting. It drained your body, your mind, your spirit. But when you stop running from the emptiness, when you fill it with presence instead of possessions, the exhaustion lifts. You discover a quiet energy, steady and sustainable, that comes not from acquisition but from alignment. So if you find yourself caught in the cycle, always reaching for the next thing, always believing happiness lies just beyond the next purchase, the next achievement, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what if the fullness I am chasing is already here? What if the emptiness inside me is not a curse, but an invitation to return to myself? The truth is simple. The man who needs nothing cannot be controlled. He cannot be manipulated by fear of missing out or by the false promises of society's advertisements. He is free, not because he has everything, but because he knows he is already whole. And this, perhaps, is the greatest revolution to stop feeding the machine of endless consumption, not by fighting it, but by stepping out of it, to live not as someone endlessly lacking, but as someone already complete, to find in presence the treasure that no money, no possession, no achievement can ever give. This is freedom. This is coherence. This is the end of the cycle. 5. Inner marriage. The union of masculine and feminine within. Each of us lives a quiet duality, two currents that seem opposite yet were always meant to dance together. One is the masculine, the firmness, the structure, the clarity of direction. The other is the feminine, the softness, the receptivity, the intuitive flow. Society often tells us to choose one and suppress the other, depending on the roles we've inherited. Men are told to reject their tenderness. Women are told to tame their strength. And in this splitting, we lose something essential, our wholeness. For years, many of us lived only in one half of ourselves. Perhaps we leaned heavily into softness, always yielding, always accommodating, always bending to keep the peace. Or perhaps we leaned into strength, always pushing, always controlling, always defending against vulnerability. And while each side has its gifts, to live in only one is to live unbalanced. It is to walk with only one leg, always stumbling, always searching outside ourselves for the missing part. Carl Jung spoke of this inner union as the Konjungstio, the sacred marriage within. It is the moment when you stop exiling one half of your being and invite both sides to sit at the same table. It is not about erasing gender or denying difference. It is about integrating the full spectrum of your humanity. To live this way is to stop seeking your other half in the world, and instead to discover that you were always whole. I remember the first time I felt this balance in myself. For so long, I had lived in softness. I said yes when I meant no. I cared for others until I was empty. I thought my compassion was my greatest gift, but without strength, it became my greatest wound. Then, through the pain of exhaustion, I found my firmness. I began to set boundaries, to speak the truth, to stand tall. And at first, I thought this was the answer, to swing fully into strength. But without softness, I became rigid, closed, untouchable. It was only when I allowed both to exist together, strength with tenderness, clarity with compassion, that I felt at home in myself. This union transforms you. When your masculine and feminine energies are reconciled, you become like a river with banks. The river, fluid, alive, ever-flowing, is the feminine, the banks, steady, grounding, giving direction, are the masculine. Without the river, the banks are barren. Without the banks, the river floods and loses its form. But together, they create life. They move with purpose and beauty, not in opposition, but in harmony. And in this harmony, you stop searching outside for completion. You no longer need someone else to make you whole, because you already are. Relationships then become a choice, not a necessity. You can share love not out of desperation but out of abundance. You can give without losing yourself, and you can receive without shame. In the language of quantum science, this union is coherence at another level. Before, you were like two frequencies, interfering with one another, creating distortion. One moment soft to the point of fragility, the next moment hard to the point of isolation. But when the frequencies align, when the masculine and feminine harmonize, the interference dissolves. What emerges is resonance, a steady, unified vibration that radiates strength and softness at once. Others feel it around you. They may not have words for it, but they sense the balance, the completeness, the wholeness. This wholeness also changes how you face life's challenges. With only softness, difficulties overwhelm you. With only strength, difficulties harden you. But with both, you meet life differently. You can be strong without closing your heart, and tender without losing your ground. You can stand firm in a storm while still listening for the whisper of intuition that tells you when to bend. This is not weakness. It is wisdom, and perhaps most importantly, the inner marriage heals the endless search for the other half. How many of us spend years, even décades, looking for someone to fill what feels missing inside? How many relationships collapse under the weight of that demand? The silent plea, make me whole. But when you find wholeness within, the search changes. You are no longer looking for completion. You are looking for companionship, and that is a very different kind of love. To stand as a whole being, strong and soft, structured and fluid, rational and intuitive, is to stand as a complete field of energy. It is to no longer wobble between extremes, but to rest in integration. This is what Jung meant by individuation. This is what mystics mean when they speak of inner marriage. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering that you have always been both, always been complete, always been enough. So if you find yourself too soft, afraid to set boundaries, let strength rise. If you find yourself too rigid, afraid to feel, let tenderness breathe. Invite both sides home. They do not compete, they complete. And when they embrace inside you, you will feel it. A quiet steadiness, a calm power, a sense that you no longer need to chase wholeness in anyone or anything outside yourself. This is the sacred marriage. This is the union of masculine and feminine. And in this union, you discover the truth. You were never half a soul. You were always whole. 6. The power of stillness. There comes a point in the journey when silence stops being frightening and starts becoming sacred. For many years, silence feels unbearable. It feels like emptiness, like loneliness, like a void we must fill. So we run from it. We fill the quiet with noise, conversations that mean little, music that distracts us, endless scrolling, endless consumption, anything to avoid the weight of stillness. Because stillness, for the one who has not yet met themselves, feels like a mirror too clear, too honest. But for the one who has begun to awaken, for the one who no longer needs to run, silence becomes something entirely different. It becomes spacious, abundant, alive. What once felt like a void reveals itself as fullness. What once seemed unbearable becomes the very ground of peace. To sit in stillness is not to sit in nothingness. It is to sit in everything. It is to realize that beneath the noise of thoughts, beneath the endless chatter of the mind, there is a deeper field, vast, calm, unshaken. The mystics called it presence. The scientists might call it the quantum field, the ground state from which all possibilities emerge. Jung simply called it the self. Whatever name we give it, it is the same, the place within, where nothing is missing, nothing is broken, nothing is lacking. In my own life, I feared silence for a long time. When the room grew quiet, I felt restless. I needed to turn on the television, call someone, pick up my phone, anything to avoid hearing the voice inside, because I thought silence would expose my emptiness. And in some ways, it did. The first times I sat alone, truly alone, I met my restlessness. I met my unhealed wounds. I met the ache of loneliness I had been covering with distraction. It was uncomfortable. It was raw. But the more I stayed, the more I realized beyond the discomfort was something vast and steady, waiting for me. That is the gift of stillness. At first, it confronts you with everything you've been avoiding. But if you stay long enough, if you keep breathing, you discover that the silence is not empty. It is full of life. It reflects back to you who you truly are, beyond the masks, beyond the noise, beyond the striving. And when you see that reflection, something inside you exhales. You realize you don't need to keep proving, performing, chasing. You are already here. You are already whole. In the language of quantum physics, stillness is coherence. It is the ground state, the baseline, the field of potential that underlies all movement. When you rest in it, you are not suppressing life. You are aligning with it. The waves of thought may rise and fall. The circumstances of life may change. But beneath it all, the stillness remains. And when you anchor yourself in it, you begin to move through the world differently. You are no longer pulled by every gust of wind, no longer shaken by every storm. You carry within you a calm center that nothing outside can disturb. This is why the person who no longer fears silence becomes so powerful, because silence cannot be manipulated. Noise can distract you, tempt you, pull you into its current, but silence returns you to yourself. In silence, advertisements lose their grip, because you are no longer trying to fill a void. In silence, the opinions of others soften, because you are no longer desperate to drown out your own truth. In silence, the frantic chase of society looks almost absurd, because you see clearly that peace is not out there, but here, in the stillness of your own being, and perhaps most beautifully, silence heals. The body relaxes, the nervous system unwinds, the mind, tired of its endless spinning, finds rest. What medicine could be more profound than simply allowing yourself to be quiet? In that quiet, your energy reorganizes, your breath deepens, your soul remembers its natural rhythm. I can tell you, the first time you sit in silence and feel not emptiness but fullness, it changes you. Suddenly, the world's noise is not so convincing. Suddenly, you are not so easily pulled into the frenzy of consumption, competition, comparison. You have tasted something deeper. And once you have, you cannot forget it. The silence becomes your anchor, your sanctuary, your source of strength. So if silence frightens you now, do not turn away. Sit with it. Gently. Breathe into it. Let it show you what you've been running from. Yes. At first it will hurt. Yes. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. But beyond that discomfort is the greatest gift you can imagine, the discovery that you were never empty. The discovery that silence is not absence, but presence. The discovery that in stillness, you are not alone. You are more connected than ever. To yourself, to life, to the vast field of existence that holds us all. This is the power of stillness. It does not shout. It does not demand. It waits patiently until you are ready to listen. And when you finally do, it reveals the truth: you were never lacking, never broken, never incomplete. You were always whole. You just needed the quiet to remember. 7. Social consequences. When a person reaches the state of needing nothing, something remarkable happens. They quietly step outside the invisible web that holds most people captive. They stop reacting to the same triggers, stop buying into the same illusions, stop fearing the same threats. And in that moment, they become what society calls a danger. Not because they intend harm, not because they rebel with violence, but because their very existence reveals a truth that society is not ready to face. That so much of what governs human life is built on dependency. Look at the world we live in. Entire industries are designed to keep us wanting. The advertisements that tell us we are incomplete until we buy. The media cycles that stir fear so that we stay obedient. The political narratives that rely on division, keeping us searching for an external savior instead of trusting our own inner compass. These systems thrive only as long as we remain hungry, fearful, and dependent. But when someone awakens, when they find fullness within themselves, these systems lose their grip. The endless noise of advertising falls flat because the awakened person is no longer looking to possessions for identity. The fear-mongering loses its sting because the awakened person no longer trembles at threats of exclusion or loss. The manipulation of praise and shame no longer works because their worth is no longer up for negotiation. And here lies the paradox. Such a person is the most peaceful, yet they are seen as the greatest threat. They are not seeking to overthrow governments or burn down institutions. They are simply standing free. Yet freedom is contagious. It is a mirror that reflects the bondage of those still trapped. When one person shows that it is possible to live without fear, without constant consumption, without dependence on approval, it unsettles the foundations of the collective dream. Society often responds with resistance. The free ones are misunderstood, criticized, sometimes even vilified. They are called selfish because they no longer conform to unhealthy demands. They are called dangerous because they no longer obey without question. They are called unrealistic because they refuse to participate in the endless chase. But beneath these labels is fear, not of the awakened individual, but of what they represent. They are proof that another way of living is possible. I have seen this in my own life. In small but telling ways, when I began to set boundaries, when I stopped saying yes just to please. Some people grew uncomfortable. They said I had changed. They said I was cold. But what truly bothered them was not my change, but the reflection it cast on their own compliance. My freedom highlighted their chains. My authenticity reminded them of their masks. And so, instead of facing their own discomfort, it was easier to see me as the problem. But here is the deeper truth. Those who awaken are not here to fight society. They are here to live as themselves, fully and freely. And in doing so, they become a quiet revolution. not by shouting, but by embodying, not by demanding, but by being. Their presence is enough to challenge the status quo, because their presence says, you don't have to live this way. You don't have to keep running. You can be free. 2. In the language of quantum science, their field of energy has shifted. They no longer vibrate in the frequency of fear, lack, and dependence. They resonate in coherence. And coherence is magnetic. It disrupts incoherence simply by existing. This is why people are drawn to the awakened, even if they don't understand why. Being near them feels calming, liberating, unsettling all at once, because deep down, every soul recognizes the truth they carry. Yes, society may label them as outsiders. Yes, they may feel like they walk a lonely road at times, but slowly, their very existence begins to light paths for others. People notice. They see that this person does not crumble under pressure. They see that this person is not swayed by trends or terrified by threats. And something inside them whispers, maybe I can live that way. 2. The social consequence of awakening, then, is both resistance and invitation. Resistance from the systems that depend on your unconsciousness. Invitation for the souls who are ready to remember themselves. And while the resistance can sting, while the criticism and misunderstanding can feel heavy, the invitation is far more powerful, because once the spark of freedom is lit, it cannot be extinguished. So if you find yourself feeling out of step with the world, if you feel like society looks at you as strange or difficult because you no longer need what it insists you must, take heart. You are not failing. You are embodying a deeper truth. You are stepping outside the cycle that keeps so many asleep. And though it may set you apart, it also makes you a beacon. This is what happens to those who awaken. They are called outsiders. But in truth, they are mirrors. They show the collective its dependency, its illusions, its chains. And in doing so, they give others the courage to ask, what if I, too, could live free? That is the true social consequence of awakening. Not rebellion, not destruction, but reflection. And in that reflection, the seeds of transformation are planted. 8. The process of individuation. Carl Jung gave us a word that carries both weight and mystery: individuation. It sounds clinical, almost abstract, until you live it. Then you realize it is not theory. It is the very heartbeat of awakening. Individuation is the process of becoming yourself, not the self others expect, not the self shaped by fear or compliance, but the true, whole self that has been waiting beneath the masks. The path of individuation is not smooth. It is not easy. It is, in fact, one of the most challenging journeys a soul can undertake. Why? Because it asks you to step away from the crowd. It asks you to stop leaning on the approval of others, to stop finding safety in sameness, to stop silencing your own truth for the comfort of the collective. It asks you to stand alone at times, with only your inner compass as your guide. And that kind of courage does not come cheap. For me, individuation began with small cracks in the identity I had built. The moments when I said yes, but felt no in my chest. The moments when I laughed but wanted to cry. The moments when I played the role expected of me, but went home feeling hollow. These cracks grew wider, until the mask could no longer hold. And in the breaking, I was forced to ask, who am I, if I am not who they want me to be? That question was terrifying, but it was also liberating. Individuation always begins here, with a fracture between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. And then comes the descent into shadow. Jung insisted that we cannot become whole by chasing light alone. We must face the darkness we have exiled. This is the part of the process most people avoid, because it feels like dying. It feels like betrayal of the image we worked so hard to maintain. But in truth, it is not betrayal. It is honesty. It is the soul reclaiming its lost fragments. As you face your shadow, you realize that the anger you suppressed was not evil but protective, that the desires you denied were not shameful but human, that the needs you silenced were not weaknesses but signals pointing to your wholeness. One by one, the pieces return, and you begin to feel less like a mask and more like a human being. But individuation does not stop there. It asks for integration of opposites, the masculine and the feminine, the rational and the intuitive, the strong and the soft, the light and the dark. It asks you to stop living in fragments and to embrace the paradox of being both. This is why individuation feels so radical. The world prefers categories, labels, clear division, but the individuated soul refuses to be split. They are both and not either, or, and in that wholeness, they cannot be controlled by systems built on division. Quantum science gives us a metaphor for this coherence. When a system is fragmented, the vibrations are scattered, chaotic. But when the parts align, when the opposites integrate, the field becomes coherent. The energy stabilizes. It radiates with clarity and strength. This is what happens in individuation. You stop living as fragments, and your being becomes one unified field. From that coherence, you move through life with a steadiness that cannot be shaken by outside forces. Yet let us be honest, individuation is not comfortable. It is not the easy path. You will be misunderstood. You will be criticized. Some people will fall away because they only knew you as the compliant version of yourself. And you will grieve those losses. There will be nights when you wonder if the solitude is worth it. But over time, you begin to see the gifts, the clarity, the freedom, the quiet joy of living as yourself, not as an echo of someone else's expectations. And in this process, something else emerges: sovereignty. You stop being a pawn on the chessboard of society. You become the player, moving with awareness, choosing with intention. You no longer act out of unconscious programming. You act out of conscious alignment. This is what Jung meant when he said individuation is not just personal healing but a service to the collective. Because when one person awakens, they become a mirror for others. They show what is possible. They break the spell of conformity, not by preaching, but simply by living. I know this truth deeply. Individuation is both loss and gain. You lose the safety of the crowd, but you gain the authenticity of yourself. You lose the illusion of belonging, but you gain the reality of wholeness. You lose the comfort of approval, but you gain the unshakable strength of sovereignty. So if you are walking this path, know that the difficulty you feel is not a sign you are failing. It is a sign you are becoming. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. You are stepping into the fullness of your humanity. Individuation does not promise an easy life, but it does promise a real one, and a real life, lived in wholeness, in coherence, in truth, is worth every step of the journey. 9. The mirror of liberation. There is a quiet power in someone who has reached the state of needing nothing. They do not stand on a stage to preach. They do not raise banners to demand that others follow. They simply live, authentically, peacefully, without apology. And in their living, they create a ripple that cannot be contained. They become, without effort, a mirror of liberation. Think of it this way. Most people move through life caught in invisible chains. Chains of expectation, chains of fear, chains of desire that never end. These chains are so common that they feel normal, almost natural. People hurry through their days thinking, this is just how life is. They chase approval, possessions, achievements, unaware that the very chase is the trap. And then, one day, they encounter someone who is not chasing, someone who moves with a different rhythm, slower, steadier, freer. And in that encounter, something stirs inside them. It is not what the free one says. It is not even what they do. It is what they are. Their very presence whispers, there is another way. You don't have to run forever. You don't have to keep proving yourself. You are allowed to rest in who you are. That whisper can awaken a longing so deep, so old, that it feels like remembering. I have seen this in my own journey. When I began to step out of the patterns of constant pleasing and endless striving, people around me reacted in different ways. Some resisted, some criticized, but some grew quiet. They watched, and slowly, their questions surfaced. How can you be so calm? How can you say no without guilt? How can you live without always needing more? I never gave them instructions. I didn't hand them a set of rules. I simply lived differently. And in that difference, they began to glimpse their own possibility. This is the paradox of liberation. You don't set others free by telling them what to do. You set them free by showing what freedom looks like, by embodying it, by becoming the living proof that it can be done. Jung understood this. He knew that individuation, though deeply personal, always has collective consequences. When one person awakens, they become a kind of lighthouse. They don't chase ships in the dark sea, shouting directions. They simply shine. And in their shining, others, navigating the storm, begin to see that there is land nearby, that there is a way through. In the language of quantum physics, this is resonance. A coherent field influences the fields around it. When one system stabilizes, it invites others into stability. When one person embodies freedom, the frequency of their presence invites others to align, not through force, not through persuasion, but through natural resonance. Liberation spreads not as a command but as a vibration. And here is what makes it so powerful: it cannot be faked. People know the difference between someone speaking of freedom and someone embodying it. Words without embodiment fall flat. But when you meet someone who truly needs nothing, you feel it. Their presence is spacious. Their energy is steady. They are not hooked by the games that catch everyone else. And because they are unhooked, they become unthreatening in the deepest sense, yet utterly unsettling to those still trapped. The mirror of liberation can be confronting. To see someone living free can highlight how unfree you are. It can stir envy, resistance, even anger. But beneath all of that, it stirs hope. Because if one person can live this way, perhaps you can too. And that seed of possibility, once planted, begins to grow. This is how transformation spreads, not through mass movements, not through imposed systems, but through individuals daring to live true. Each liberated soul becomes a beacon for others. Each act of authenticity becomes a silent invitation. Come home to yourself. And the beauty is, you don't have to be extraordinary to be such a mirror. You don't need a platform or a following or a grand stage. You only need to live as yourself. To stop needing what the world insists you must need. To find your center and rest in it. From that place, every interaction, every presence, every breath carries the frequency of freedom. So if you ever doubt the impact of your journey, remember this: the way you live is more powerful than anything you say. Your freedom is not just yours. It echoes, it ripples, it awakens, and in a world addicted to chains, your wholeness becomes a silent revolution. You may never know whose life you touched, simply by living true. You may never see the seeds you plant bloom, but trust that they do. Trust that every time you refuse to return to bondage, every time you stand in authenticity, every time you embody peace, you are offering the world a mirror it desperately needs. That is the gift of the awakened individual. They don't liberate the world by force. They liberate it by example. They are not saviors. They are reminders. Reminders that freedom was always possible. Reminders that wholeness was always within reach. Reminders that needing nothing is not emptiness, but fullness overflowing. And so, the one who reaches this state does not only live free for themselves, They live free for us all. They become the mirror of liberation. And in that mirror, we see not just them, but the reflection of who we, too, might become. The quiet fire of true freedom. The man, or woman, who needs nothing from society, is not society's enemy. They are not standing with fists raised against the world. They are not looking to destroy or dismantle through force. They simply are no longer bound. And that kind of freedom is disarming. Not because it fights, but because it refuses to play the game. We live in a world where fear and desire are the twin leashes that guide the majority. Fear of rejection, fear of not having enough, fear of being left behind, desire for more, desire for approval, desire for power, desire for belonging. The system thrives on these leashes. It knows that as long as you fear and as long as you crave, you are predictable. You can be sold to. You can be manipulated. You can be controlled. But when a person discovers within themselves a stillness that no fear can shake, and a fullness that no desire can add to, the leash slips from their neck. They walk free, and in their freedom, they show the rest of us a possibility we had forgotten. They remind us that freedom is not something granted by a government, a corporation, or even another human being. It is something we claim, something we embody, something we choose to live. I have walked through this awakening in my own way, and I can tell you, it is not without cost. To step away from dependency is to risk misunderstanding. To stop chasing what everyone else chases is to look strange in their eyes. To refuse the game is to stand apart from the players, and yes, it can be lonely. Yes, it can be painful, but in that loneliness, there is clarity, and in that clarity, there is strength. Carl Jung captured it so perfectly. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. That choice, to become, is the essence of liberation. You are not doomed to be the product of your wounds, your past, or society's expectations. You are the architect of your becoming, and when you embrace that truth, you reclaim the authority that was always yours. What happens next is quiet but radical. You stop fighting the system and simply stop feeding it. You stop pouring your energy into endless consumption, endless seeking, endless proving, and without your participation, the system loses its power. That is why the awakened individual is seen as a threat, because they reveal that the machine depends on our compliance. Without it, it crumbles. But make no mistake, the free one does not live against society. They live beyond it. They do not destroy with fire. They disarm with presence. They show that it is possible to walk through this noisy, demanding world, untouched by its claws. They become like a flame, steady, luminous, uncontainable, not burning down the forest, but lighting the path through it, and that light spreads. You may think your freedom is only for you, but it never is. Others notice, others feel it, others are stirred by it. Even if they cannot name why, your refusal to be bound becomes a silent invitation for them to loosen their chains too. Your stillness becomes their reminder. Your wholeness becomes their hope. So, if you are listening to this, and you feel the tug, if you sense that you have been living with leashes of fear and desire around your neck, hear this clearly. You are not trapped. Freedom is not something you must beg for. It is something you choose, here and now. It is the decision to look inward instead of outward, to choose authenticity over approval, to choose presence over distraction, to choose love that includes yourself. And when you make that choice, you will feel it. The chains will not all fall away at once, but link by link, moment by moment. You will notice a lightness. You will notice a steadiness. You will notice a fire within you that no system can extinguish. That fire is yourself, long buried, now awake. This is the gift of individuation. This is the gift of needing nothing. You do not become cold. You do not become indifferent. You become alive in a way the world cannot touch. And in that aliveness, you not only free yourself, you become a beacon for others. The free one does not stand as an isolated figure, but as a reminder of what we all can be. They do not say, "Follow me." They say, simply by living, remember yourself. And in that remembering, the world changes, not by force, but by resonance. So may you, too, dare to step beyond the leash of fear and desire. May you choose to become not what happened to you, not what society demands of you, but who you truly are. And in doing so, may you discover the quiet, unstoppable fire of freedom that lights not only your own path, but the path for countless others still waiting to awaken.